Okay, let's proceed. Good day, good afternoon, greetings to all. Welcome to this new edition of the Hernan Santa Cruz Library webinar series on open science. My name is Tamara Brathwaite. I'm an associate librarian with the ECLAC Library, the Hernan Santa Cruz Library. And with me is Claudia Vilches, library staff member and chief engineer behind these library webinars. Attendees to our regular webinars would be accustomed to seeing Walter Chalier in this position as a moderator of these sessions. He sends his apologies as he's unable to be with us at this present moment. He's at a competing session. However, he hopes to join us later and we would hope to see him as well. However, in his absence, I hope to moderate this session with half of the ease and the charm that he is known for. I will try my best. Today, we are happy to welcome two accomplished researchers and speakers who will be presenting on the experience of the Utrecht University regarding the changes in their promotion and tenure systems and how they have been facing the developments and challenges of open science practices. However, before I invite our presenters to take the center stage, we have a bit of housekeeping. Firstly, just to let you know, this presentation is being recorded and is simultaneously being transmitted via YouTube. So hello and welcome to our audiences in the WebEx and on the YouTube platforms. Our audiences are on mute. However, you can make your voices heard by using the chat feature, which is open to capture your questions and your comments. And please feel free to use it anytime during this session. The structure of the webinar is in two parts. We start with the first part, which is a 45-minute presentation by our speakers. And then the second part, it's followed by a question and answer session, which will also be 45 minutes long. And I've seen a sneak peek of the presentation, and I have no doubt that the question and answer session will be very vibrant. Claudia, at this point, I'd just like to ask if you have anything to add, and if you would please introduce yourself as well.
Thank you to you all for your attendance. The only things I would like to add is you could do the questions in Spanish. And well, I would like to introduce me. I have been organizing this cycle of webinar for all these years. So it's a pleasure to have another one with these notable speakers. So please, go ahead, Tamara.
Thank you, Claudia. And it's great to have your experience here to hold my hand during. This is my inaugural webinar, helping organize it in front of the camera. So it's always great to have the moral support of not only Claudia, but my other colleagues in ECLAC as well to support us. Okay, so one caveat. I apologize in advance for my heavy Caribbean accent in handling the next bit of that I will read. These will be the bios of our presenters. And as I was mentioning to them, I have been practicing to read some words that I'm not that familiar with. So please forgive me if I don't get it absolutely accurate, but know that I'm doing this to the best of my ability. Please allow me to introduce our speakers. First up, we have Frank Midema. He is the Vice Rector of Research at the Utrecht University and Chair of the Utrecht University Open Science Program. He studied biochemistry at the University of Groningen, specializing in immunology, with a minor in the philosophy of science. From January 2009 to March 2019, he was a dean and vice chairman of the executive board of the University Medical Center, Utrecht. Along with Frank, we have Bianca Kramer, who is a subject specialist in life sciences and medicine at the Utrecht University Library, and a member of the working group on recognition and rewards at the Utrecht University Open Science Program. She studied biology at the Wageningen University, and she did her PhD at the Radboud University, Nijmegen, and subsequently did a postdoctorate in Toronto, in Canada. Since 2009, she has been working at the Utrecht University Library. We're so pleased to have them here today to share their thoughts. And I am thrilled to invite you to the center stage. Please do take it away. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I will start immediately, and it's for me a great pleasure to do this and to share with you all our thoughts about open science and recognition and rewards. But maybe that my dog will say give some rumor, then I have to take care of that. But we will just start. And this will be about the transition about open science, but this will focus on why we have to change the incentive and reward system. Open science, as many of you know, and I saw who was in the audience, is of course the overall aim is to increase the quality, the progress, and scientific and societal impact. So it's really driving to a better relation with society, to have to produce knowledge which is more geared to the problems in society. And of course, this is not obvious, and I will discuss that at length later on. And also Bianca will do that. I will just go to some issues that are the reason why people want to change and want to go to open science and go to different metrics. And this slide is called Metrics Shape Science. And that means that you have to realize, and I will show that later on, that the way we evaluate science, the way we evaluate scientists is extremely important for how reputation, monies, professorships, permanent positions, postdoc positions are being distributed in the system. So in fact, everything relates to how do we, what type of ideas do we have about quality and excellence? These are very, very critical. And in the past, we have been using a metric system. I will discuss that later on, and Bianca will go into the deep. And this is, say, going for novelty and quantity, but not for real quality or replication or relevance or impact for society. It was a specific type of novelty and quantity. And everything was done in a 4-year circle. So it was 4 years, you got the funding, you have 4 years with your, with your postdoc or with your students to produce data. And in 4 years, you have to show something and put something on the table, mainly, of course, articles in journals. Of course, 4 years is very short. So if you take a real problem, a very complex problem, that is a real problem in, say, for clinicians, for patients, or for instance, in education, then the problem could be that you have nothing to show yet after 4 years. And if that happens to a starter in science or to an early career scientist, that may be the end of your career, because then the committee where you go with your results for the next round of money will say, well, there's nothing to show. This person, this Frank Miedema, he doesn't know how to do science. He doesn't even produce papers, so we will not give him the next round of funding. And this is not this is a game that's really being played in that way. So we were trained to take on problems that can be solved in 4 years. Are these the real problems? Well, they are reductions of real problems to something that you can solve in 4 years. You already hear, this is of course risk aversion. So you're not going to take a real problem because then that will be difficult, and it has to be done in a very short term. Many issues that should be studied by science cannot be solved in 4 years, and not by one individual. We go back to that later. And also very, very important is, and this is not an academic issue, but this is really for society, is that problems with, and also fields with high societal impact, but with low impact in the journals and in the impact in the metric system that will be discussed later. These problems they have a disadvantage compared to the fields that do well in the metric system. So, for instance, molecular biology of cancer does well because it is basic and it's of course very biomedical. But for instance, if you want to study how people survive cancer after a bone marrow transplantation and chemotherapy, what the quality of life is and how that could be, say, innovated and improved, that is applied, and that is also more social sciences related, and that is seen with less esteem. But for many people, these are extremely important issues that they have to deal with after surviving cancer. The tumor is gone, but the patient is still there, I always say. So you see how metrics really shape science. And this is at the individual level of individuals making a career and trying to survive in the system, but also at the national and institutional level, where the research agenda many times does not properly reflect societal needs and disease burden. I myself, I did many times collaborations in Ethiopia and South Africa, and there you saw that they were just mimicking our types of choices for research. They wanted to play the international game, and it was very hard for them to cater to the issues of the local community, etc. People tried, but they were not favorably regarded by scientists as top scientists. So you feel metrics-shaped science is the real problem that we have to solve to go in the direction of open science. And to open science, of course, you know this, and I will just go over this very briefly. It's very much about engaging, when appropriate, with relevant and representative stakeholders. This is extremely important, not only in Holland, in the West, but also even more so in the South, where you are, in South America, Latin America, Africa, where, of course, the catering to society, contributing to the real problems in society is even, I would say, even more important than in the more developed countries. But of course, also here we have huge problems in Holland that have to be taken on by science. So we have to engage. We have to listen to society. What is your problem? What type of issues can we deal with? What can scientists do for you? And of course, very important is also to define the problem to be investigated, because many times researchers, they think they know what the problem is, but if you discuss with people in the context, in society, in a region, or for instance, in Ethiopia, then you find out what the real issues are, and then you have a better idea of what should be studied and what should be, say, researched and what should be innovated. And of course, also the next thing is actively promote that research will be, say, implemented and that research will be taken into action in the context where the problem was. Many times research stops with papers and then it stops. And then the knowledge is not being used because there was no connection with context, no connection with stakeholders. So this is for me the main issue, the reason why we do open science. Get this relationship, proper relationship, and trust with society, with the people that you want to collaborate and want to work with. Of course, you have to share your results, and it should be open access, and it should be fair data. Bianca will be talking about it even in more depth. These are enablers. These are enablers of being open to society. And this is also to remind you, this is also the reason that the European community started open science. They wanted to have science really connecting with society. And therefore you need all these, say, enablers. And of course, not in the least, we have to change the incentive reward system, because I will show you at this point in time, over the past 30 years or so, the incentive reward system and the metrics used are not compatible with this type of practice of science, of open science. That many of you are aware, but we thought it was nice to have this on the slide again, that there's many initiatives and actions already all around the globe. This is also playing out in Australia, in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is playing out in Latin America even more than people think, and also, of course, in roughly every country where people are. In the European community, it has been very high on the agenda. You see this here. And this started in the European Union in 2015-16 with Carlos Moedas, and they declared open science the standard for science in the European community. So if you get funding from the European community, it is open science that you have to do, and they will say keep you to that. And of course, we have Coalition S and Plan S. I'm not going to discuss that, but Bianca will do that. And of course, also recently the UNESCO. They are going very, very strongly for the open science policy. Because why? Because open science ideally should be the way to connect the North and the South, and connect also the East and the West. So then this is the real way to share our data and to see to it that we all profit from the knowledge that is produced wherever in the world. There are, of course, dangers. So we should not be naive. We should really take care of, say, are these practices, these new practices, important, and also are they, say, good and to the advantage of the global South and even the East? That will be discussed, I'm sure, in the question and answers. But this is something, of course, we have to keep in mind. And of course, there has been, say, many publications and movements related to recognition and rewards, and that will be discussed by Bianca as well. In Holland also we have some strong, we are very lucky, there's a national activity that is called Room for Everybody's Talent. Well, say no more. That will be an incentive and reward system where we all say benefit, and where all these excellences can come to fruition. So that we will see that there's many different types of excellences and not only one. So this is again the European Union's agenda. You can see it's a very complicated agenda. So it's about rewards and incentives, research indicators, next generation metrics. It's about open access and future of scholarly communication. It's about the European Open Science Cloud. Where do we leave all those data in the open? Fair data, you are familiar with that. It's about research integrity, transparency, and it's of course of teaching people how to do it. And then in the end, and this is for me a little bit disappointing, in the end they say citizen science and public engagement. But in the statement that they made when this slide was made up by the European Union, the statement was, it's all about public engagement. We want to have an open connection between science and society. So this should have been number one in my mind. And so on our slides, we always put this on the top. And it was in Utrecht, we started to sort of mimic the European, approach. And that means that if you want to, move science and society closer to each other, so that eventually they are in the same context, they talk to each other, they respect each other, they have a relationship with each other, they listen to each other. Two ways, really two ways. So scientists not only sending and not only saying how wonderful they are, but also listening to the needs in society and do co-creation and finding out. To get in this direction in the future, and we're already making steps, of course, we need, for this public engagement, we need open access, we need fair data and software, and we need to change the recognition and reward system. And I will go and show something about the incentive and reward system. And I use therefore, this is the program that is in Utrecht, by the way, going on. So we have open access, fair data, we have public engagement and recognition and rewards. These are now big components of the whole system in Utrecht. We have teams, they are collaborating with the deans and the faculties. Here you see the rectors signing Dora, you are familiar with that. And so we are very blessed that not only nationally, but also in our university, everybody is geared in the same direction. We are going in the same direction. And this is the Dean of the Sciences, for instance, and we are all there. And this is rather unique. So this is something that we have declared in our new strategy. This is also for us the standard. I'm very proud of that. I will show some slides to show you why incentive and rewards are so very, very critical. And this is a slide I used for 10 years already. And you can see here, this is the business model of science. And I can tell you how it works. So my boss, he came from the United States. He went to Amsterdam. He had published wonderful articles. He got recognition by the Dutch Cancer Foundation, by the funders from government. He got money. He bought his staff. He hired. He bought equipment and he hired staff. Excuse me. I was one of the staff, the PhDs, and we were producing data, doing experiments. It was a wonderful time. Very highly competitive. I loved it. And we knew how to get, papers published. My boss was very American. And so we were having these articles. He was the last author. We were the first authors as juniors. We got our own recognition and our own fellowships, and we got our own money. And then I had my own lab. And so I had my staff and equipment, and they were producing data, and I knew how to play the game. And I published my articles. And 10 years after my boss became a professor, I became a professor in Amsterdam. And all based on articles. It was very article driven. It was all about writing your articles and getting, based on these articles, the next round. So everybody makes these rounds. I made those rounds 30 times, roughly. Getting new grants based on the articles published by the previous grant. And of course, what is totally lacking in this, credit cycle, as it is called by Bourdieu and Latour, what is lacking here is, of course, society. Where is society in the equation? And of course, in the early days, even when you did cancer research, it was scientists that were looking at your output. But the money was donated to the Cancer Foundation to do cancer research and to cater to the problems of cancer patients, their families, their kids, etc. But in the beginning, when I started my career in the early 80s, it was all based on science. And of course, this is now already changing, but open science will dramatically open up the business model, and there the external parties, the stakeholders will enter. And in the way I just described, they will also be involved in evaluating our output. Now, at this point in time, it's about, say, number of articles, journal impact factor will be discussed by Bianca, the H-index, oh my God, and the amount of funding, of course, also. If you get a lot of funding, you're probably a good scientist, because then you produce even more articles. And you can already see how I explained it. This is really, everything was geared to articles. So when I became the dean in 2009, this was the system that was totally, say, installed in my medical center. We were producing 4,000 papers per year, and the deans and I was, in the beginning, we were counting them. Really, we thought it was very important. Of course, we knew that it was not, but the funders, European Research Council, everybody was based on this type of, say, evaluation. And of course, everything behind paywalls, because we needed those Nature, Science, and Cell papers for our careers. Didn't wonder, so I did HIV/AIDS research, and I'm still, of course, it's embarrassing, but we did research on very relevant aspects of HIV/AIDS research, but it was behind paywalls. So people in Africa, in Latin America, and wherever in the world that needed that information, because HIV/AIDS was a huge problem, not so much in the Netherlands, but it was, of course, in Africa and in other countries around the world. But our data was not available to them because it was behind paywalls, Elsevier, etc., etc. And so this was a problem. And the other one is in the box at the left. There you can see it was all about first order, last order, books, all about, say, individual, say, recognition, more or less. It was about individual. It was also a lot of competition, even within labs. And of course, with limiting funding, that means it is throat-cutting competition. People were really fighting with each other to get grants from the government, and the prestigious grants especially. And of course, very little. So that means very little room for team science. Collaborating with, say, with your competitors, that was not very wise. You rather collaborated with somebody in America who was not a competitor than with somebody in around, say, Amsterdam. And you feel already that is not the way it should be. And of course, multidisciplinarity and diversity not in the equation. So and the idea was also, of course, now we know that you need multidisciplinarity and diversity because the problems in society are, of course, of a multidisciplinarity and diversity, say, nature. We need staff who knows what is outside the walls of the laboratories, for instance. So where we want to go, and Bianca will, of course, take you there. Where we want to go is here. What we want is that we engage with societal stakeholders before we take on the choice of research, the problem, and we do this co-creation, and we do evaluation together, and we do implementation. That is all now, that's in the open science equation. And so it's not only about articles, but it's also about implementation. It's about societal impact, etc., which you see here in this new box. So it's quality, real quality. So peer review, reading, understanding, based on narratives. And it's also about societal impact. When I started doing my research in the early days, societal impact in the university laboratories was sort of, that was also something that should be done, but it was all about papers. But I trained, and I did most of my career before I went to Utrecht in the blood transfusion service. So I was already in a very strange place doing science in the context of a problem of blood transfusion. And of course, the problem in blood transfusion in the early 80s was HIV/AIDS. So you see how I got into this, for me, this was pretty normal, but not in an academic center where I landed in Utrecht later on. And of course, very important is also culture, academic leadership, culture, safety, and equality, diversity, and inclusiveness. So is this really a good reflection of what type of things you want to study? And do you have the right, say, competences on board? You can really say excellences on board. Multidisciplinarity is very, very important, and therefore you need to collaborate with totally different, say, scientists to solve a more complex problem. Of course, open access publishing and fair data sharing, and of course, you can also think about open peer review. People are doing experiments with that in the same kind. So you see that it all depends on how do you evaluate and how do you do your incentive and rewards. And if that is not okay, and I will show the next slide, and now Bianca takes over. If you are not having the proper incentive and reward system, people will not publish open access. They will not spend a lot of time on public engagement because that will keep you from publishing your articles. And publishing articles, as long as publishing articles in high impact journal is the main say, criteria for getting grants, people will just do that, because even highly educated and very clever people, they want to, if they want to survive in science, they're going to comply with the rules. And I knew that I'm guilty. I became a dean based on my papers, and we now all know that we have to change. But I was raised in the system, and I can tell you, for many people, it's very difficult. If you say that we have to go in this direction, and what is put on this slide, then people feel very insecure. They say, well, how can we now decide what is quality? Societal impact? Who's going to attribute societal impact? Is that just a story, and can you fool everybody? A paper in Nature is really something that you can really count, and you know what nature means, whatever that may mean. Bianca, I think it's time for you to show us where we go.
Yes, thank you, Frank. And indeed, I will take over now, and I will go into more detail about how we are approaching this problem at Utrecht University. Because as Frank said, the changing recognition and reward system is instrumental in facilitating all these other changes that we want to see and all these other open science development. Before I continue, I'd like to say that the slides will be available afterwards. I also put a link in the chat to the slides, and a lot of the images in the slides are all linked to the initiatives they refer to. So you can go from the slides to a lot more background information. And just as in the olden days, Frank, can I have the next slide, please?
Next slide, please. Yes.
Yes. So in changing the recognition and reward system, for us at Utrecht University, that means changing the focus on what is rewarded and on the level at which evaluations take place, moving from individual researchers to really more the team effort. And I'll tell more about that in a minute. And what's interesting is that now we are starting to really implement that and discussing within the university and within the Netherlands what this means. Can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Then that gets a lot of attention and discussion, and a lot of those uncertainties, a lot of that uncomfortableness that Frank also just talked about, that comes to the surface. And then what you see is that it's often the people who have benefited or are currently benefiting from the current system. They are the ones that are most vocal against it. And the people who are at a disadvantage because of the current system, they are most interested in these changes. And it's something we see in our university. It's something we see in the national discussions in the Netherlands. And I also think that's a really important thing, aspect of what's happening globally. If we look like we are in a privileged position at Utrecht University to even be able to have these discussions and to make these changes. But I think the discussion at a local, at a national, and at a global scale, at who stands to gain from the current system and who's disadvantaged by the current system and stands to gain from a more inclusive and broad system of evaluation, I think that's a very important discussion to have. And even though I'm going to talk mostly about Utrecht University, I hope that's a discussion we can have in the Q&A session afterwards. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start with the Dora Declaration on Research Assessment, because also for us that was one of the starting points in thinking about this. We finally signed Dora in 2019 after a lot of discussion. And what most people know about Dora is that what Dora says is not to use journal-based metrics, such as journal impact factors, as a surrogate measure of the quality of individual research articles or individual scientists. And why that is, that's because there are so many problems with doing that, with, for instance, the journal impact factor. Next slide, please. And this is a very nice overview by colleagues of ours at Delft, just highlighting some of the problems with the journal impact factor. And I'm sure many of us are well aware of these problems, so I won't dwell on them, but I'll just highlight some of them. They're problematic at the level of the individual research article, because a journal level metric that's based on a mean score doesn't say anything about the individual journal article. It also measures only one thing. It measures citations and doesn't say anything about the quality of the impact or the reliability of a specific piece of research. And perhaps most importantly, also in a global context, it really affects bias. the journals that even have a journal impact factor are the journals that are selected by Web of Science to be included in their core collection. And that selection, that leaves out a lot of journals. That leaves out a lot of, that also guides publication practice, where people feel they need to publish. It affects developments in publication, journals that see it as their main goal, that they need to be indexed in Web of Science, they need to get an impact factor. So it has a lot of downstream negative effects. And I already saw a question in the chat about APCs, and I'm sure we'll get to that in the Q&A, how that is all affected by this sort of creating a hierarchy of journals that has nothing to do with the quality of individual research article or the research they are reporting on. Next slide. And also the H-index, which is a researcher, a measure at the level of the individual researcher, has a lot of problems because it focuses on, it only focuses on publications and their citations. It can only increase. The more you publish, the more your H-index can be. It's a very, very limited measure. It differs per field. It encourages or it benefits later career researchers. And again, it doesn't say anything about the real impact and the real quality of research. If you go to the next slide. Yes, I really like this this figure that Stephen Curry from Imperial College made a couple of years ago, where he plotted his articles, all his research outputs, still limited to articles and I think book chapters, and noted the number of citations they were getting, but then also noting the other types of impact that his work had. So yes, some articles really received a lot of citations, some didn't. And some of those also have now appear in textbooks, or they are very important in pharmacology and in developing drugs. Some of them really gave rise to a lot of discussion about, for instance, the value of the journal impact factor. That paper was never published in a journal. It was only posted on bioRxiv. It has given rise to a lot of discussion and a lot of developments in how we view and how we deal with journal impact factors. Some other work of him that perhaps didn't get a lot of citations, it was very influential in policy documents and in influencing policy. So there are a lot of different types of use of academic research, a lot of different types of impact that are all not captured by looking at citations only, that are all not captured by looking at journal impact factors, and that really limit what you are evaluated on, and thus, given that funding cycle, also what you get funding for. So looking only at citations and especially looking only at journal impact factors really pre-sorts for a specific type of research and the ability to do that research by a really privileged group of researchers. Next one.
Sorry.
Yep.
This is a good one, yeah.
No, yeah, this one. So a lot of people know Dora because Dora really speaks out against the use of the journal impact factor. But Dora also gives very concrete recommendations on what you should do or what you could do to make research assessment more broad, more equitable and more fair. And one of the things they say in their recommendations for institutions is to consider the value and the impact of all research outputs, including data sets and software. And I could add to that a lot of additional academic activities as well. And also consider a broader range of impact measures than just citations, including more qualitative indicators such as influence on policy and practice. So this already gives a nice framework, a nice concrete suggestions for how to look at evaluation in a different way. Next one. Now, in talking about this at Utrecht University, we went further than just looking at research. We really looked at academia, at what a university does as a whole. And that's not just research. That's also teaching, it's education. It's also professional performance. Very concretely, like in the medical faculty, just caring for patients. Or all kinds of other contributions to practice and to society. It also very much depends on teamwork. It very much depends on good leadership. And it all is centered around creating impact. And by creating impact, we really consciously did not consider impact only as societal impact or even worse, valorization. We really considered impact as all the effects that all these academic activities, so research, professional performance, education, supported by leadership and teamwork, can have on society. And that can be impact created by research articles, impact created by a lot of other activities as well. So this is sort of our holistic view on what could be evaluated. And that means in practice a number of different things. First of all, it means broadening rewards and recognition, broadening what you look at. Again, as I said, not just looking at research, but also looking at what's happening in education, in professional performances, how teams are organized, how leadership works. That could all be things where you could look at when you evaluate how well a group in academia is doing. And that brings me to the second part, looking beyond just individual contributions, looking beyond individual researchers as a unit of evaluation, but really looking at a team as a whole. And that offers up a lot of freedom and more room for people to not have to be all good at the same thing, to not all have to produce those papers in those high impact factor journals, but also to value other contributions you make as a team. It means that some people could perhaps specialize in education, specialize in public engagement. Not everyone needs to do everything, and not everyone needs to be good at everything. And really looking at the team as a whole gives a lot of room to do as a team, do a number of these things. So that's the broadening of recognition and rewards. Look at multiple dimensions of what's happening in academia. Next one. Second, it means what I would call so broadening and also deepening is how are we looking at all these different activities and what do we value? And that means not just looking at citations and GIF and H-index, but really looking at quality, really also taking into account openness, using narratives, meaningful metrics, looking at societal relevance. So really being more thorough and less relying on proxies in how we evaluate all these research activities. That's what I would call the deepening of recognition and rewards. And the third aspect, next slide, is the context and situatedness, because there is not a one size fits all. And you could say that just the system that is used a lot of times, especially in more the hard sciences, by just considering articles as output and citations as impact measure, is like a one size fits all that doesn't fit all. And really the context matters. Different teams in different contexts can make different choices in what they think is important. Frank already mentioned different types of medical research. And what works for one team, what's important for one team, can be very different for other teams within the same university, but also within different universities and also between countries and continents. So I think what we should be very aware of, very cautious of, is that we do not replace like a single metric that we all agree is not suited for measure by a longer list of indicators to look at, and then still apply that same list of indicators to all research. I think that will be almost just as damaging as we are now looking just as one single indicator. So really the context and the situatedness of research evaluation. And that starts by allowing, by definition of strategies, by allowing research groups to define what their vision is, what their ambition is, what their strategy is. And then thinking about ways to achieve that vision. What does that mean for the competences you want in a team? What does it mean for the research activities you undertake? And then see what are the desired outputs of that? What do you want to achieve? And then what could be good indicators to measure or to see if you have achieved that? And that can be qualitative indicators, and also it can also be quantitative indicators. I'll come back to that. But really, it really depends on what you want to achieve, how you are actually going to evaluate whether you achieved it. So this is something we also want to facilitate within Utrecht University, rather than having a prescribed set of outcomes and indicators. Really encourage people, and especially teams, to set their own strategies and to decide for themselves what their way of working is, and then what they want to achieve. Next one. And you could do that for research. You could also do that for those other domains that I mentioned. So education, professional performance, and leadership. And the idea is not to have this separate, but really look more holistically. What do you do as a research team on each of these, in each of these areas? And what do you need for that? Next one. So broadening recognition, deepening it, and allowing context and situatedness. What you could think, and what could be a risk of that, is that you would still have research teams that say, yeah, well, yes, our priority is to publish in those high impact factor journals. And well, you said we could set our priorities, so that's what we're going to do. And we've actually seen some examples of that, of research groups or faculties that indeed broadened also in promotion and tenure, broadened the dimensions they looked at. So they also included education, they also included other activities, but for research, they still stuck to those journal impact factors. Well, for that, I think it's important to also, as in this case, a university, set guiding principles or define the values that you as a university stand behind. And for us, these are some of the guiding principles for recognition and rewards. The collective as a point of departure, invest in leadership on all levels, allow diversification in profiles and dynamic career paths. Tying back to what I said before about teams, not everyone has to be good at everything, not everyone has to do everything. And then, very important, recognizing and rewarding openness in all domains, and recognizing and rewarding quality over quantity. Now, what could this mean in practice when you look at research? Next one. When you think of the collective as part of the departure, that could mean focusing more on collaboration and less on competition. And that can be, you could look at that in a broader scale, like for instance, competition for funding. You can also look at it even within teams. Within teams, do people compete for who gets the most grants or who has the most papers? Or within teams, do we focus more on collaboration? Involving stakeholders in all aspects of research. Again, thinking back of what Frank says, that's really perhaps at the beginning of even deciding what your research line are and what your research question is. Investing in leadership on all levels also means involving people in decision making, giving people agency in what they want to do. For a research team, making those decisions on the last slide, like what are our ambitions, what are our goals? Is that something that a principal investigator decides, or is that something that's really done in where everyone has a voice? And then also realizing who doesn't have a voice, who's not at the table, who should perhaps be there. I already mentioned the diversification in career paths, also recognizing different contributions to research, also from people who are research supporting, like research software engineers, data management people, also recognize their contribution to research. Next one. Then valuing openness in all domains. Of course, that's where open access and open data come in. But it's really about more of that. You can really think about research in all its phases, even starting with the research prioritization and planning research, how open you are for input from outside, how open you are to sharing your research plan at an early phase, to reusing already existing data, for pre-registration, sharing preprints, open peer review. Openness can really be an aspect of all phases of research. And then recognizing quality over quantity. That of course has to do with publication pressure. It has to do with recognizing methodological quality over the impact of positive results. So do you value research, or do you value an article because it reports on a sound bit of research, irrespective of whether the results were as spectacular as you would have hoped perhaps, or whether it shows negative results that also give you a lot of information? Or do we select and value more positive results and thereby give rise to a whole host of issues with reproducibility and trustworthiness of research? And then the last aspect of this is valuing the story behind the numbers. So not staring blindly at impact factors or at citation scores or at altmetrics numbers, just looking at the number, but really look at, okay, who is using my research? Who is talking about my research? What does that say about the audiences I'm reaching? What does that say about where I can contribute to a discussion and where I'm actually making a contribution? So we hope by these principles, we give some direction to also how teams think about what they would like to achieve. Next slide. And it's also a good segue to the use of metrics and indicators in this, where we've said we want to put qualitative measures, narrative, and strategy first. That's what's important. And quantitative indicators can be used. They can illustrate, complement, or enrich this approach. If you can show, okay, where research is used, then quantitative indicators can help, but they should not stand on their own. And they should definitely not be aggregate metrics, like the H-index, like the journal impact factor. That doesn't say something about individual research outputs or an individual researcher, but is more an aggregate measure. Next slide. And in thinking about this, and in thinking about what kind of indicators and measures, be they qualitative or quantitative, you want to use, I really like this framework, which was developed by the eNorms Research Evaluation Working Group in the UK by Elizabeth Getz, among other people, that really sort of encourage a reflective approach on evaluation and a reflective approach on choosing what measures to use. Again, starting with what you value, so not with what others value, but really what you yourself value. Not use indicators and data sources because they are easily available, but because they really show what you want to know. Consider context. Already talked about that. Also, who are you evaluating and why are you evaluating? And sometimes also making discussion that, no, perhaps we don't need to evaluate and we're not going to do it because it's easy. But you could also decide not to do that. Options for evaluating. Talked a lot about that. Choices for which metrics to use. Involve the people you will be evaluating in those discussions, not impose something on them, but discuss with them what their strategy is, what they want to achieve, and what the best way is to evaluate that. And also consider I don't like the word, but I think it's appropriate here, the unintended consequences. Who might your approach discriminate against? What could there be gained? What could be the downside of using a specific approach to evaluation? And then in the end, evaluate your evaluation. Really think, really look, okay, did this achieve what we want to do? Or do we need to go back and rethink our approach? So I think this is a very good framework to help you think reflexively about making those choices. Next slide. So a little bit about the implementation. Of course, well, we already mentioned it. Evaluate with the evaluators, help people or asking groups to develop their own strategies. This is not something that can be imposed, that can just be imposed top down. We have a group involving a lot of people from different areas of the university thinking about these guiding principles and about like sort of the big picture. But then we will involve, really develop this further with all the different groups in the university. And one sort of way of organizing that will definitely help is that we have faculty open science teams in each faculty that have people that are specifically interested in open access of fair data and software, public engagement, and rewards and recognition. So all the different elements of our open science program. And they can also include other people in the faculty that are really invested in this and want to bring this forward. And this is also where this more general idea can be translated to how that works for different disciplines and how decisions can be made in how to bring this further within the faculty and really help research group within the faculty to start working with this. And I didn't put it on the slide because the information is only available in Dutch as far as I could find. But already in tenure and promotion, we've seen that in the promotion criteria to go from sort of the entry level full professor to the second level full professor, I can't explain it better than that, that has been revised, and all those elements of triple, so teamwork, research, education, professional performance, and leadership, they all now are part of that evaluation protocol, and also a more narrative assessment and supporting that with indicators and not using journal impact factors. That's all included in that tenure and promotion profile already. So that's a very encouraging sign and very nice development. Next one. So far, I talked a lot about what's happening within our own university. But these are developments not just at our university, there are developments at the national level, and as Frank also mentioned, also on the European and more international level. At the national level, 2 years ago, the position paper was written by the collective universities, by our Dutch national funder, by our national academy, who really set out sort of the framework for broadening research and recognition. And out of that followed sort of action lines for a number of different partners. For universities, really looking at redesigning academic career paths, like we are doing at Utrecht University, but the same thing is happening at all the different universities, at different paces, with different focus. Some people do this really integrated with an open science program. At other universities, it's more a parallel development, but all universities are engaged with this. The funders are looking at adapting their procedures for funding allocation. I'll tell a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there's also what used to be called the standard evaluation protocol, which was used to evaluate research units at a national level. So all the economics faculties, compare them with each other, define strengths and weaknesses of all. That has been revised also to be in line with a more comprehensive, more holistic vision on recognition and rewards. Next one. So to tell you a little bit about the approach of the national funders, what they've been doing is they've introduced what's called the narrative CV. And contrary to what that name might suggest, that's not just writing a self-promoting narrative. It's really an opportunity to put in writing, instead of like a list-based CV, really write your academic profile outlining why you are well suited for the research you propose to do. And it also includes a list of key outputs, a limited list of outputs, so maximal 10 outputs. That again illustrates how it shows your abilities or why it's related to the project you're proposing. And very important, those are not limited to publications, but it really explicitly mentioned that that could also include data sets, software, public engagement activities, a lot of other types of outputs, including preprints. On top of that, within a funding application, you are encouraged to use, well, to explain why those key outputs are important in this specific context. And also you are encouraged to use indicators to show the quality and the impact of those outputs. But those indicators, again, should not be aggregate indicators. They should be indicators at the level of the specific outputs. And applicants are asked to provide context for those indicators. Why is that a good measure for the type of quality or the type of input of impact you want to show? This has been used, it has been piloted in some funding instruments. It has now been rolled out more broadly, and it will also be evaluated how this works, how it's experienced by researchers, how it's dealt with in evaluation panels, review panels, because that's of course the flip side of this. So this information will also be very useful going forward. And for the sort of the third part of these national developments, so what's happening at universities, what's happening at funders, and what's happening with the strategy evaluation protocol, I'll hand back over to Frank, because he's been very much involved with the revision of that strategy evaluation protocol.
Thank you very much. And I'm really proud to be able to present this to you, because I was on the committee. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was on the committee that was deciding this strategic evaluation protocol, and it took 1.5 years. It was a vigorous discussions, because it was really completely in line with what we have been discussing until now. So it's completely in line with what Bianca has been saying of what we do, what we did in Utrecht, and what was going on in the room for everybody's talent. So this is really something, and for me, it's very special that this was sort of approved by the national system. So all research evaluations are being done with this protocol now, which are national protocol. And you can already see from the print here that it's about academic culture. It's about PhD policies. How do we train our PhDs? How do we do human resources? It's talent management, diversity. It's about open science. Safety, academic leadership, everything is on board. And of course, it's also about viability. It's also about societal relevance. It's also about research quality. So there's a lot of peer review, really reading, not counting, but reading going on in this new protocol, which of course, for many academics being raised on the metrics, the classical metrics, this is a huge change. So people have to realize now they have to put in wording what was their research all about and where do they want to go. Basically, a narrative, very, very important. So the idea is very much what Bianca was also saying, and what was also in this new proposal that came out in 2020. It's about vision, it's about strategy, and about aims. So if you ask the question to a department, say head, what is your research in your department all about, and what are you aiming for? 10 years ago, or even shorter ago, people say, well, we publish papers, and based on these papers, we want to get grants, especially from European Council, from the most prestigious, say, funders, because then we are doing a good job. And now we say, no, it's not about publishing papers. It's about what's your idea? What is your strategy to get there? And what are these aims? And this can be to say real problems in real life. It could also be very academic, but then you have to really say, explain what you want to do. And this is all about content. So it goes back to really say aims and strategy. For many people, this is in the first instance a change, but eventually, of course, people say, yeah, this is of course totally logical. This is of course what we have to do. And even basic science fits very nicely in this type of context, because for many issues in society, as I started with HIV/AIDS research, we had to do a lot of, say, molecular biology, basic immunology, basic virology, to understand HIV/AIDS. It was not only applied, it was also very much basic research in the context. And that is very important. So, and of course, the idea is you can pick your own indicators, like what Bianca was already saying. Every field, every sort of topic has its own indicators for this type of quality in this type of context. So this is a wonderful, say, experience to have been able to draft this. So this is, it's about quality, societal impact, and viability. So I'm just explaining the picture. And but it's also about 4 aspects, like open science practices and efforts, exactly what Bianca was saying. It's about PhD policy and training, something new. But of course, there are thousands of, only in my hospital, At this point in time, there are 1,300 people working on a PhD. Bianca, did you know that? 1,300 people working on a PhD. So it's a factory. And then, of course, that's very important because these people, they will go to society. They will go stay in academia, some of them, but many will go to academia and they have to be trained in the proper way. And we have to be very, very, very spending very much time on getting there the proper training and educating them to be good citizens and good scientists. And of course, academic culture, that means openness, safety, inclusiveness, research integrity. It's all in the equation. So the committees that are evaluating scientific units, departments, institutes, they have to go all ask questions about these issues. They have to talk to the personnel, the scientists, staff, but also operators working in those environments. And of course, human resource policy is very, very important. We have pointed out, both Bianca and I, diversity, talent management, extremely important. Diversity and also equality and inclusion is extremely important. And this is not because we think we have to be woke or something. No, this is really very, very important if we want to do a good job as a university, both for teaching, both for, say, training, but also to do the proper research. Very, very important. And I gave some examples already in the beginning of my talk. Of course, very interesting is also that in this type of incentive and rewards, all of a sudden now social science and humanities are at the same level, have the same position. There's no hierarchy anymore with respect to STEM, to say the more hard sciences, as Bianca was pointing them out. And also, of course, basic and applied science, they have both their own excellences and they fit in this type of schemes because we are dying for good basic, but also dying for good applied sciences and many issues that have to be studied. I already mentioned diversity and inclusiveness, peer review, narratives. This is all, of course, this can all be, say, taken into account. Of course, the question is, if we don't use these hard metrics anymore, Bianca, aren't we very subjective? So is it now my personal opinion that some basic research or some research is good or are excellent or are such? Well, no, because this is all done by peers in groups and they discuss and they filter out and they compare their opinions and they come to a conclusion, which is intersubjectivity. Very, very important. So nothing is done by one person. And of course, open sciences practices are rewarded. So this is a totally different feel for how are we going to evaluate, say, science and scientists. So I think we are back at slide 1. And Bianca, I have the privilege to close now what we presented. I think this is, you can also see how we talk about it. This takes enormous amount of energy and effort. This is a big change. This is not, say, trivial. For many people, it implies uncertainty. So will the rest of the world go in the same direction? Will the European community go in the same direction? If I make my career in this type of system, can I find a job at Oxford and Cambridge or Harvard or Copenhagen or Stockholm? These questions are coming up. And of course, the discussion also about discussing our science in an open way with society, with stakeholders in society. It poses questions about autonomy, neutrality, independence of our academia. And of course, these discussions have to be, say, we have to discuss and we have to take them on. And we already saw some in the chat about, is this system also favorable for the South, for the global South, or is it only for you guys in the North? That will come up. I think I will leave it here and go back to the people who are in charge of this seminar. Thank you very much.
Great to see you both, and apologies that I couldn't be there at the beginning of your presentation. I didn't miss much, but I missed let's say the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But I've been trying to catch up with that, and unfortunately there've been quite a lot of questions through the chat. So this is really great. So refreshing, the change of paradigm that you are proposing here. This is really very inspiring, I'm sure, for all of us, and for all colleagues from the region, from all over the world. congratulations. This is really, really great to hear your experience and the lead that you are taking there in making open science a reality. And this is, yeah, I'm sure really inspiring to a lot of people. Okay, so let's move to the questions. We've got a lot of questions. I give the floor to Tamara, and we will then one by one run through and try to cover as many questions as possible within the time frame that we have. Thank you so much. Tamara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Wouter, and welcome. It's a relief to have you here. I know you vested a responsibility for moderating to me, but it's always great to have your experience to rely on. So welcome into the session. I'm really happy that you can be here and be the support that we really appreciate. Expressed thanks to Frank and Bianca for, as Wouter said, that inspiring presentation. You took me back to my academic roots, both as a teacher and as an academic librarian. So really interested in posing questions and hearing your responses to the questions that have been put in the chat and the questions that I personally have for you. One of the first questions that I want to ask, and we'll do a back and forth, either Frank or Bianca, you can ask these questions. Some I have for Frank, some I have for Bianca, and some I know Wouter will also pose as well. But the first question that I wanted to ask was about mentorship. I think you noted this new reward system can accurately capture the breadth of an individual's research and their scholarly output and impact. But what role does mentorship have for young researchers seeking to make their mark in academia?
Can I take that?
Thank you.
I think that is what we think is academic leadership. And also, if you look at units, so if you evaluate a unit, then you can even ask the PhDs, how are you being mentored? How are you being, say taught and approached in preparation for your next say level as an academic in academia, but also in society. So there's questions about, is there openness, is there feedback, how is talent management going on? And so this is exactly what mentors should do. So mentors not only how do you get your next paper in a nice journal, but also about how are you developing, how can we cater to your personal needs? And these questions are now being asked. You saw them in my protocol. They are also in the protocol that we have in Utrecht. This is extremely important. And this is not for nothing, because in the early days, that was neglected, or it was not giving so much, say, attention. It was more about the cognitive side of doing science. And this is more about how are you, and how is the group working around you, and how do you feel in the group, and are we taking care of you? It seems to be it sounds a little bit soft, but this is extremely important for a good, successful, say, group, and for a successful laboratory. And I was running laboratories myself, so this is extremely important. So and you can, and now I will stop. But even if people ask advice at a mentor, should I do my postdoc here or there, or with this person or that person? People can even give guidance and say, well, in your case, I think you're better off in that place with that person, with that lady who we know has a good group and who's taking care of you. Not only this is not soft, but this is also academically care with all aspects. Science is just there's so many things that pop up when you do when you're in science. In the laboratory, people notice. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, Bianca, can you saying something?
Yeah, I would like to add something to that. Also, that it's really a two-way street, and I think a very nice example is what has been happening in the Utrecht, the UMC, the University Medical Center, where the PhDs, a group of PhDs, they came together to devise a proposal for their mentorship, a proposal for their annual sort of evaluations, or their whatever you call it, where they defined that they thought that was too narrow and that was not sufficient. And they came together and decided, okay, what do we think is important, and what do we think should be covered in those in those conversations. And I think that's really a very nice example of that, that you're just not just dependent on your principal investigator or your supervisor, but it's also possible, and it should be possible, to have that as a two-way conversation.
Thank you. Can I pass over a question to Claudia now?
Okay. I would read the comments from Tatiana. First, she says, first, I want to congratulate the speaker for the initiative and for pointing out new ways of evaluating academic scientific activity. COVID-19 came to reaffirm the need to work collaboratively, interdisciplinary in research, in search of the common goods. How to go from a competitive evaluation to a collaborative evaluation, where the objective is not to discredit or punish the researcher, but to improve and contribute to increasing the quality of scientific knowledge. For you both, who can start? Bianca?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm also really enjoying, because I'm reading along with the question as you're translating it, so that's also very good for my very rudimental understanding of Spanish. I think it's perhaps the crucial question how to bring this about, and it won't happen by this being decided top down. I think it's really something that needs to be. It's a cultural change. It's a cultural change at the level of individual research group, universities, national funders, and the international system. And that's not easy. But I do think, looking back a couple of years, even looking back how Dora was talked about then, and how universities were hesitant to sign Dora or just signed it as a token gesture, and compared it with now, where at a lot of places there's really much more deeper thought and much more steps towards implementation of this. I am hopeful that we are starting to see some of this culture change. And I think the realization that this is not about punishment, the realization that this is not about even piling more obligations on researchers, but it's really about giving more space and more room for different career paths and different activities. I hope, and in the end, that's also what will benefit society the most. I hope that that realization can be the driver to really make this happen. Frank, do you have? I think you're muted.
I have nothing to add. It's very formative. So it's really to help people to be constructive, to go in the right direction, and it could also be critical, but critical in the constructive, let's say, in a constructive fashion. So if you have this little bit more this or that, then it will be even better. That type of stuff, and it was also more forward-looking than backward-looking. So it's in many cases it will also be forward-looking plans, strategy. How can the committee advise you, etc., etc. And this feels better for many people. Yeah.
Can I perhaps add one more thing? Again, from the Dutch perspective, for a long time, at least that was my perception, a lot of the different players and stakeholders have been looking at each other. Like, most people, I think, will agree that the evaluation system is what's holding real progress back. But people were pointing to each other. Yes, but this is what the funders want. Yes, but this is what our researchers want. So keeping each other hostage. And I think in the Netherlands, a lot of kudos goes to our national funder, for one, because I think they were the first to really make these steps and to really make some concrete changes. And that also encourages, for instance, universities, that it's possible to make these changes, and they can also work with that. So in that sort of catch-22 situation, someone to actually make a move, I think, is also a very important driver.
But now we can say, if you change, the funder has already changed as well. So if you apply for funding, the funder will be in the same fashion. We'll do it in the same fashion. That helps a lot. So Bianca is a very strong point.
About open science, we don't talk about open access on steroids. We are talking about complete change of paradigm, right? And this is something, I mean, we've also seen in the, I mean, the need for collaboration in modern science, in modern research, because otherwise we would never have been able to develop vaccines within 1 year, basically. Because before, it used to take 10 years on average to develop vaccines. So this need for collaboration is clearly there. Now, another thing that the pandemic taught us is the pandemic, we often say, it has been also an infodemic, right? We've seen the phenomenon of preprints and the confusion that preprints have been generating at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were still looking for vaccines, and there was preprints being used by journalists, and perhaps not putting into the right context of what a preprint is. There's a lot we can discuss about that, and I think there's also a lot we learn from that in terms of scientific communication. But there's something else that we learned from this pandemic is, still, after so many years that we've been working on open access and now on open science, that still quality information has this problem of lack of visibility on the internet. If you look for references that demonstrate that the Earth is flat, you will find more references demonstrating that it's flat. And the same with, I mean, the whole context of a pandemic. So what can we do, and how is this change of paradigm contributing to a better visibility of quality information on the internet, which I think is something that we all have to keep fighting for?
If I can say something about that, trying to wrestle with Frank online, who gets first. I think I really liked your point that all the issues you pointed out, all the things we've seen happen around preprints, are perhaps not so much about preprints, but are really about how we deal with scholarly communication in general. Something that has perhaps been amplified by what we're now seeing with preprints, but the same issues have been occurring with peer-reviewed articles. So I think it's really about how we communicate, and also how we sort of, I don't want to say educate, because that sounds presumptuous, but have a conversation with society on what research is like, and that research is not providing clear-cut, nicely packaged truth, but is a process of questioning, and it's a process of finding truth. And I think that's somewhere where open science, with really opening up that toolbox and really showing what happens behind closed doors before you get a publication, that opening that process offers a lot of opportunity for education on that. It also opens up a lot of possibility for misuse. I completely acknowledge that, and I don't really think that can be helped, and definitely won't be helped by putting more things back behind lock and key. But that education, that continued discussion with society, I think is very important. And also there, when research is open, it also allows the option for it to be translated in different languages, but also for different audiences. It also it opens up that possibility for discussion. And I hope, and I am idealistic in that, but I hope that will really help that discussion.
I couldn't agree more. I think what's very important is that people start to realize, as I showed you the business model, many people didn't realize that this is also part of science. Opening up the black box of how knowledge is produced, how we come to a claim, that there's a huge amount of discussion going on, like, did HIV cause AIDS? There was for 10 years a discussion going on. Many people thought it was, but there were still people who didn't in 1992. So showing that, and showing how we come to conclusions, but also how, when we have better information and better data, that we can also reject the previous claim and come up with a new claim. That can all be done in the open. We don't have to be ashamed. And I agree. We used to sort of mythically pretend that we had a magical way to produce absolute knowledge. Of course, we have to be honest and say, well, this is how we do it, and see how successful we have been with what has happened. There are vaccines for COVID, yes, and they were produced exactly in that way. So I couldn't agree more with Bianca, and this is also in my book that will come out in a month. describe how we all came from the myth of absolute knowledge to now realizing that how we do it in the real. And scientists know it because this is, if you're in the lab, this is how we produce it. And be honest, is it scary? Yeah, it is scary because people are going to say, science can also be an opinion. No, it's a collective opinion, it's community, etc., etc. Now, I know already starting to teach. I don't think that's the idea today, but there's a lot to tell about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. We're all students of life. It's a learning opportunity for all of us. So thank you. Feel free to teach. On that topic, though, I wanted to ask about the working group on recognition and rewards and your commitment to offering room for everyone's talent. I think, Frank, you spoke about this in your presentation. Diversity is something that you continue to hear about, diversity and inclusion. But sometimes it's easier to attract the diversity and a little more difficult to support the diversity. What sort of support mechanisms have been considered among the committee to ensure that you not only attract the talent that you want, but you also support and maintain them?
Bianca, do you want to go on this or?
Yeah, I can start with this. I think this is really a discussion that we need to have with the faculties, with the research groups to see what the needs are there. And I think where that dialogue comes from. Like not assuming, not making assumptions, not make assumptions that we know what's best, but really also being receptive to criticism on that, being receptive on getting pushback, being receptive, trying to create an open culture where people can actually be frank about what they need. And it's also something that's luckily not just something of the rewards and recognition track in the open science program, but the university has a different sort of strategic, a goal to work towards that. And so there's a broader movement at the university for that, including some really critical, challenging voices, which I think is only very good in this discussion.
I can also add that, for instance, this is of course the issue is also how do you see to it that students from many backgrounds also make it in university, come to university in the first place, and can also study and be successful, and have also that we know we have to spend time, and we have to put a lot of effort in getting that going, because this is for many, say, students who have the cognitive abilities coming from another background, it can be a problem. And I have been on large Wellcome Trust, say, committees where this was about PhD training, where EDI, so equality, diversity, and inclusion was a criterion. And then people decide, then we have to have we have to spend very, very early on to help the students, and also to get them into PhD tracks, that you have to have extra say time for people to make it, because it's, to be honest, that is really necessary, and people realize that this is not automatic. This is not because you say we are diverse or inclusive. No, it's hard work, and we have to spend time on it, and people realize that very, very well. But you can see how I talk about it. This is pretty complex, but it has a lot of attention in our university, also in the way we look at the evaluation of researchers. But it's hard work, but it gets a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Can I ask Claudia, do we have another question from the chat to pose to either Frank or Bianca?
Yep. We are going to move to the library role. Amelia Munoz from one library here in Santiago asks, in your opinion, what actions can we take from libraries to support these initiatives?
I think in general, at least that's the role we try to take at Utrecht University Library, supporting researchers in all the aspects of scholarly communication. That's of course a very broad answer. I also want to focus a little bit more, because I also saw that in the chat. I think the decisions we make as a library on behalf of the university in, for instance, investing in transformative agreements or making big deals with publishers, sort of promoting the APC-based model of open access publishing versus also contributing time and money and effort in other forms of open access publishing, in diamond journals, supporting smaller non-profit initiatives, supporting more open infrastructure. I think that's something that libraries can and should and do ask themselves how they see their role and what responsibility they have there in this system.
Wouter, can I pass to you for a question? Thanks, Bianca.
Yes, APCs.
Everyone's favorite subject.
Everyone's favorite subject. So as you know, Bianca and Frank, there's a lot of resistance, and I think rightly so here in the region. And the region has been particularly active in resisting this scenario of APC, which basically, instead of eliminating the fundamental inequality that you have and putting an economic barrier in terms of access, you put the barrier in terms of publishing, or the ability for researchers to publish. So this is a difficult topic. What do you think about APCs?
I will give the answer. And it's not a difficult question, let's be honest. So I am also an ambassador of Coalition S for Plan S, and it started as a transition using APCs to get out of the problems that we had. It has been realized now by Plan S, and Bianca can take on from there. It has been realized by the ambassadors of Plan S, by Coalition S, that APCs, indeed, that's another way of getting inequality in the system. And again, it favors the richer countries, the more developed countries compared to the global south. Let me put it that way, if you allow me. And I think that it has been realized, and I'm totally with that. That is really, I have been working in Ethiopia, in South Africa. People cannot pay there for AP for 5,000 euros to get a paper published. That's impossible. And still, that is a system. And then people will argue, yeah, but sometimes you have waivers, or you have, and sometimes they have funding from Welcome, for instance, and they can pay. That's not the solution. That's not the solution. And it's also in general not a solution. So people realize now, and this has been in Coalition S, I can tell you, and it's not a secret, this has been on the table for a year. And Coalition S and Plan S, those people have been realizing we have to go to other platforms. We have to leave APCs behind. We have to go to other platforms that are paid in another way and can be free for also people to publish and to read and to get their, say, monies from other sources. And Bianca and Jeroen Bosman have been involved in a group of people who have advised Coalition S on how to go in this direction, which is called Diamond. And what I think I think this is also a difficult decision, because the funders have to think, the institutes have to think, the governments have to think who's going to pay. Eventually, of course, we want to have what we always say: we have to own the pipes. These platforms should be public and not for profit. And of course, there is some cost involved. But a paper in Nature costing 10,000 APC cost, that's of course nonsense. So this is the way we go. And Bianca, you can say something about, say, what you have been advising and what you have been involved in studying this problem of diamond platforms, etc.
Yeah, but I think especially in this context, this is perhaps not something that we need to be telling Latin America, but this is really something that we from Western Europe and North America can really look at Latin America, how it can be done with platforms like Vedalic, particularly, and also Cielo. So I think this is really a message for the funders currently in Coalition S. And also a plea to make that possible, because what's happening, and that is very directly linked to this whole rewards and recognition, the value we put, or the value funders put, or people put on those high impact journals, those journals in Web of Science, they really push for a certain way in publishing. there are funders, there are publishers that are on record saying that their aim is to increase their impact factor so they can charge higher APCs. And even if they don't come out for that so blatantly, also the very highly selective journals, that also increases costs and thereby increases APC. So I think in that in a recognition system, if we move away from the value of journal hierarchies, that opens up a lot more possibilities for more smaller niche journals that serve the publication system better, that serve the need of researchers better, which is not to publish in a journal because it is high impact, but to publish in a journal because it's where their research will be read by the people they want to reach. So that, I think, is also the flip side and a very direct link to recognition and rewards. And that's part of the recommendations in our report, next to really make more, reconsider where you put your priorities in what you want to fund, both as a funder and as an institution, where you want to invest in, also how you recognize people who spend their time on for volunteer labor for journals. Is that something you expect them to do in their free time, or is it something that they're also valued for as a part of their academic work? So I think all these things can help, but it's a very intertwined problem, and it's a huge problem.
Thank you.
It just appears that there are so many factors, not wanting to use the term factor because we're trying to get away from that with this new qualitative method, but it's so complex and it's so involved. And there's so much discussion that we can have on this. I really like to thank you for your presentation. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I can just ask for one or two more questions before I hand over to Wouter. One particular question that I had, you spoke about in your presentation, Frank, the engagement of the public and having active public engagement. How is this envisioned in this reward system?
It's interesting because that's all a matter of time and also money. So spending money and time on getting, for instance, I was raised on, say, HIV/AIDS research, and where we we spent a lot of time communicating with the people who were participating in our cohorts, and then discussing with them and asking them and spending time and also communicating it both ways. That takes an enormous amount of time. It was also new for us, so it was not only having an evening downtown Amsterdam. It was also preparing, thinking, discussing, what shall we do? And that type of time has to be, say, rewarded, that we have to take that into account. And so that is very important. But also people have to be trained. People have to be educated on how you do it. People have to be educated that we have been, say, very much, say, sending and missionary type of communication instead of listening and asking. And really listening, deep listening to what's going on in the community. For HIV/AIDS, I have seen that many times, also in Africa, that we learned the hard way. Sometimes we found out that a lot of research was totally not, say, adequate for the local situations. So if you went there, our local partner said, well, no, you don't understand it. Listen, it's really different, and we have to do that type of research. And so I learned the hard way there. And many of my colleagues in Amsterdam, we learned the hard way. HIV/AIDS was something completely different in Ethiopia or in South Africa compared to, or in Swaziland compared to, say, Amsterdam. You couldn't even imagine. I can give a lot of examples. In my book, you will find those stories of embarrassment. I can call. We have to call that. So we learned the hard way, and this takes time. It takes. You have to educate people. This is not something that automatically happens. I'm a white boy from the north part of the Netherlands. So what can you know? If you go to Swaziland or if you go to Ethiopia, you don't have a clue. If you are not trained, if you're not educated, etc., etc. So I think that answers your question. It takes a lot of energy, and it will be, say, more quality, less papers, but more quality and more, say, impact for the people that you are aiming at, and who are dying to get that information, because in HIV/AIDS it was really dying.
That's why this is so crucial at this point. Claudia, can I hand over to you for a question?
Yes, please. Regarding to some indicators, have you measured some way the results and impact of this new vision or program internally or at national level? What indicators are you using to measure that this vision is working?
Yeah, evaluate the evaluation. I think that's a very good question. I think for now that's really qualitative and seeing what's happening, and sort of also monitoring how discussions are going. And I think the fact, for one thing, that we saw that the past summer, that there was a very heated discussion that started with an interview with someone from the reward and recognition team here in Utrecht about the decision not to use journal impact factors anymore. And that caused a lot of response from researchers in the Netherlands, with a lot of, well, one open letter, one counter open letter, a lot of discussion. I think that is one measure, one indication that this is a discussion that's not only being held at a program level, but is really landing and is really generating discussion among researchers themselves. So that's one thing. That's not like we're actively monitoring, but that's something you can see. I think it will be important going forward to compare initiatives that are taken, and to compare different initiatives at different universities or also across countries, and to see what works in which circumstances. I think we will be able to learn a lot from that. So that's definitely something that we plan to monitor without prescribing indicators to do that.
Yeah, a little bit to end on the positive side. I think we have been using such a scheme in UMC Utrecht for 5 years now, and I was the dean. And I think what we now see, and that people are looking at it, you see that the promotions for professorships and also associate professorships, we now see a clear tendency for all the types of say academic career advancement. You see that people who 10 years ago, 15 years ago, had a very hard time getting a professorship or becoming an associate professor, they are now being promoted based on public engagement, based on these other indicators. There's a clear shift. I give a very concrete example. Nursing science, that was always considered like something for applied sciences, for the School of Applied Sciences. And now there are 3 professorships in nursing sciences, because this is really what is extremely important. It is no Nature and Science and Cell paper, but it's really important for, say, a medical center to have professorships in nursing sciences, to educate the nurses in an evidence-based, say, fashion and whatever. So this is already a change that I'm very proud of, basically based on changing the incentive and reward system. And because these are easy, this you can just simply see. And so there is something happening, but also in collaboration with the Center for Technology Studies in Leiden, Sarah de Rijke, we are now evaluating what happened over the past 5-6 years in Utrecht in this respect. And we are waiting for their, say, publications and theses, and that is a broad study. And yeah, we hope that we see some positive signs. There could also be, say, adverse effects that we have to deal with and that we have to mitigate. So we have to learn from that. We have to be open, and we have to be open to that feedback, like we have been, say, advocating in the whole past 2 hours.
Yeah.
Bianca, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, sorry. One thing I think is also quite important is to, when doing these evaluations, to find out which people we're not hearing from. Because what will likely happen is that we will hear from the people who thrive in, like we do now, who thrive in the current system, who will thrive in a new system. But those people, for instance, who leave now because they're not comfortable or they're not able to stay in academia, I think it's important to also listen, hear them and learn from them. And the same will go into going forward in evaluating any changes we make, to really be able to make sure that we listen to everyone there.
This is truly a unique vision. Yeah, sorry, Claudia, you were saying.
No, I'm giving thanks to you both. for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed doing this session.
Me too.
It was
Yeah, thank you
mutually
so-
enjoyable. Thank you. Let me hand over to Wouter. And just thank you so much for sharing your vision. And thanks to Bianca for putting the link to the upcoming publication that Frank will be launching soon. Congratulations to Frank. Wouter, you have center stage. Thanks to all.
Thank you so much, colleagues, Tamara, Claudia, and also the people behind the scenes. Thank you so much, Bianca and Frank, for sharing your experience. Very inspiring experience with all of us. Your experience of breaking one of the most vicious circles of traditional scholarly communication, which is about lack of incentives. And you are showing that this is possible, that open science is not just a dream somewhere far in at the end of the tunnel, but it is possible, and you are making it a reality. So that's fantastic and very inspiring to all of us. I would like to thank you, Bianca, Frank, for this presentation. As you know, we will be sharing your PowerPoint. We will also share the recording of this session on our channel. And I would like to thank my colleagues of the Hernan Santa Cruz Library, Claudia, Tamara, Marlene, and any other colleagues who've been supporting us to prepare this session, this webinar. Also the colleagues of the ICT department of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And finally, last but not least, the audience, the people who've been listening, sending questions, participating in a virtual way in this session. Thank you for being there. We have a large community of, after many years, been building a large community of open science, and this community is still growing. That's really very encouraging to see. Open science is possible, and let's keep working on this. And all the best. Take care, and hope to see you soon in another occasion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.